Hello and welcome to another episode of Big 12 Big Football. I'm Aaron Pryor. Hey, what a week of action we had this past weekend. The second half of the season now begins. The Big 12 has got three teams ranked in the top 25, led by West Virginia in there at number 6 in the country in both the coaches and the AP polls. Looking at the current standings now, West Virginia and Texas are tied at the top, both at 3-0 in league play. Baylor follows Oklahoma, while Texas Tech also joins that mix at 2-1. That would be because the Red Raiders beat TCU on Thursday night in Fort Worth. Coming into this game, you were probably thinking that there would be points galore. Instead, TCU turned the ball over 3 times, and Duffy hit Jadian High for a 68-yard touchdown on a TCU busted coverage, then later scampered 38 yards on a QB draw to take the lead in the fourth quarter. TCU had a chance late, but on 4th and 1, the Tech defense covered all facets of the field and forced Sean Robinson into the Frogs' third and final turnover of the night. The Frogs will host Oklahoma next, while Texas Tech welcomes Kansas to Lubbock next Saturday. West Virginia will meet Iowa State up in Ames this week, both teams coming off of wins last Saturday. The Mountaineers are just one of 11 teams in the country with an undefeated record, but that will certainly be put to the test now starting this week. WVU still has road games against Texas and Oklahoma State after this weekend, while they host Baylor, TCU, and Oklahoma there at the end of the year on Black Friday. The Mountaineers had to battle against a scrappy Jayhawks team that forced 2 fumbles and picked off Will Grier 3 times in the first half. Now, that's not what WVU fans want to see, and obviously not what anybody associated with the football program wants to see repeated either. But keep in mind that Kansas does lead the nation in turnovers gained and turnover margin. Now, the positives that will be taken into this week's game: WVU is currently one of 5 teams in the Power 5 to rank in the top 25 in scoring offense and scoring defense, scoring better than 41 points per game and giving up fewer than 19 a game. The bottom line here is West Virginia's success rides on Will Grier, and even though he's thrown a few interceptions lately, he's still in the top 10 in nearly every passing category in the country, and the Mountaineers are 5-0 because of it. He leads the nation in touchdown passes per game, he's second in passing yards per game, and third in total offense. Iowa State's defense has been solid thus far, ranking right in the middle of the Big 12 in most categories. A big disruptive presence on that D-line has been junior Jaquan Bailey. Big number 3 has 16 tackles, 7.5 tackles for loss, and 2.5 sacks on the year. Look for Bailey to cause problems and try to force Will Grier out of the pocket throughout the game. Of course, we can't talk about Iowa State without bringing up the emergence last week of Brock Purdy. The true freshman quarterback slung it all over the yard in Stillwater, completing 18 of 23 passes for 318 yards and 4 touchdowns in the game. Maybe equally as impressive was his escapability to get out and run. The former Arizona High School Gatorade Player of the Year ran the ball 19 times for 84 yards and a touchdown in the win. Expecting the same production from Purdy after putting a full game on tape for WVU to study is probably expecting a little too much, but as far as expectations go, it's going to be one heck of a game up in Ames on Saturday night. Let's back it up to the 2:30 game now, where you can bet that Austin, Texas is going to be wild on Saturday as Baylor comes to town. The college football world is abuzz after the Horns' Red River Showdown win. Sam Ellinger's 384 yards of total offense and 5 total touchdowns helped lead the Horns to victory. But that was last week, and Texas has a Baylor team coming in fresh off a win over Kansas State. One of the biggest bright spots for the Longhorns last weekend had to be the production they got from the wide receiver position. LJ Humphrey had his most productive game of the season, snagging 9 balls for 133 yards and a touchdown. On the other side, Colin Johnson had 6 catches for 81 yards and a touchdown, coincidentally thrown by LJ Humphrey. Both receivers are on the Biletnikoff watch list. Johnson is on pace to well surpass his production from last year. He's at 30 catches for 431 yards and 4 TDs headed into this weekend.
Collins improved his consistency. He's as good a 50-50 ball, jump ball guy as I've been around. This is a guy with size and speed and strength now too to go with that has a chance to do some really good things.
Last week, we featured the work that Jalen Hurd has put in for Baylor. Coach Matt Rule said that Jalen presents matchup issues across the board because of his size and his speed. Well, he showed out again last week, snagging a career-high 11 balls for 135 yards, and for the second week in a row, ran in a touchdown as well. His efforts haven't gone unnoticed either. The 6'4 senior was also added to the Biletnikoff Award watch list on Wednesday. Joining teammate Denzel Mims, that award is given to the best wide receiver in college football each year. And speaking of Mims, the junior is also having an excellent year for the Bears, coming off an 8-catch, 90-yard performance against K-State, including this ridiculous bobbling catch that we're definitely going to see in top plays here shortly.
Put him into the boundary, I try to isolate him, get him the one-on-one matchups and let him work. And, he's another guy, great run after the catch. And, he's really taken a step in terms of developing into a complete receiver, not just a big play receiver, but a guy who can get off press, a guy who can block. It's important to me that our players leave here well-rounded and versatile, and he's made some major steps in that regard.
As good as Colin Johnson and L.J. Humphrey are, Mims and Hurd are the most productive combo in the Big 12. They're both in the top 7 in catches, total yards, and yards per game. This game has a good chance of being a fourth quarter game. In fact, a 50-50 chance. Half of the Big 12's 14 conference games to this point have been determined by 10 points or less. 2:30 p.m. on ESPN. Now, let's wrap things up with the top 3 plays from last weekend. Number 3, he's a permanent resident of top plays. It's Hakeem Butler once again with the toe tap TD, his 4th of the year as Iowa State up into the Cowboys in Stillwater. Number 2, speaking of Denzel, Mims with this fantastic tip catch to himself for the touchdown. I really don't understand how he came down with this ball. It would have been number 1 any other week. But when you beat your rival in the final seconds, that gets you vaulted to the top. Number 1, Cameron Dicker throws up his horns as Texas defeated Oklahoma in the Red River Showdown. That's it for this week's Big 12 Big Football. The second half of the season begins, and the race to the Big 12 Championship is rolling full steam ahead. We'll see you next week for another episode of Big 12 Big Football. For the Big 12 Conference, I'm Aaron Pryor.